happens when we do conclusively have proof of the existence of Sasquatch? I firmly believe that the United States will have their third recognized indigenous tribe. Yalakasla, greetings in my language from my Kwakwakiwak tribe from northeastern Vancouver Island, British Columbia, Canada. My name is Tom Sewid. I run the Facebook group, YouTube channel, and website Sasquatch Island. And what it's all about is I wanted to help correct some of the people out there in regards to the British Columbia First Nations names for our Sasquatch and other creatures, and also to bring the what we call First Nations, that's us Indians from Canada, but to bring our perspectives, beliefs, art, dances, songs, but mostly our protocols in regard to Sasquatch. So it's pretty much indicative of all tribes in Western Canada and throughout what I call Sasquatch Island, which is North America. And the reason why I call it Sasquatch Island is because every tribe and others have stories or names, encounters with Sasquatches throughout North America. And North American Indians used to call, or would call North America Turtle Island because it looks like a turtle from space. The Aleutian Islands are a flipper. Northern Canada, Hudson's Bay, the mouth, Labrador, Newfoundland, the other flipper. Now, of course, Baja and Florida, the flipper, Mexico, Central America, the tail. Now, how my ancestors knew it looked like a turtle from space, I'm not getting into that. I'm strictly Sasquatch, not UFO. So anyway, Sasquatch Island is here to help everyone with the Facebook group to educate them on bettering their game to get conclusive video or camera proof of the existence of Sasquatch. I lived in the bush for a good part of my adult life for well over 26 years. I'm 58 years old right now, and I started my commercial fishing career when I was just a young boy in diapers sliding across the galley floor when mom was cooking on dad's commercial salmon seine boat. But at 10 years old, I would be taken by my grandfather in the summer, and my career as a commercial fisherman would start. Every summer I did it until I got out of school and graduated, and then I would enter other fisheries like herring and trap fisheries for shrimp and crab, and you name it. If it had a fin or a scale or a shell, I caught it one way or another throughout my career as a commercial fisherman for 48 years. But during that time, I got to go all through British Columbia's coast. I would go into inlets that most humans would never get to 3-4 decades ago. And we would go in there and anchor up if the wind was blowing and it was stormy, or we're waiting for a commercial fishery to open. What do? Well, you go in a dinghy and you go to shore and you go beachcombing, exploring, hunting, harvesting. And when we go to the different ports, like let everyone who's interested in Sasquatch knows about Les Stroud, who I know personally, and who, went to Clem 2 in central British Columbia to the Kitasoo-Hay tribal territories and did his first Sasquatch documentary for his show years ago. Well, I'd been there years before him, and other native communities like that are isolated, where you can only reach them by a float plane or a boat throughout British Columbia. I would go there and I would ask people, what do you know about Sasquatch? What are your stories? Have you ever seen them? And, it was just what I did. I was interested in Sasquatch right from early childhood, when I went to, I guess it was probably 12 or 13, when I went to the movie theater and saw that show, The Unexplained or something, with Leonard Nimoy narrating on the Loch Ness Monster, Sasquatch, and UFOs. And I was so enthralled with that movie that I would start purchasing books from the library, from stores, or get them from the library that talked about Sasquatch, Bigfoot. And so it's always been an interest of mine. And then, I smell things out there in the bush, hear things. And I knew it wasn't anything but what we call chonahua in my tribe. And chonahua, I'll show you a picture here of my new book. That's chonahua right there. and it translates to the wild woman of the woods. And as a child, we would hear that we had to behave ourselves because Jonah is over there, behind you, in front of you. She's always watching children and she's not allowed to touch them. But if a child acts up and is lazy, pulls a temper tantrum, steals something, fights, well, Jonah can come at night and with big hairy arm reach into the window and grab that misbehaving child who's sleeping, tear them out of the house and rub spruce sap into their eyes from a tree. And it's real sticky like tar. And it blinds the bad child. And then the child is thrown into that basket in the back of this Jonah or into a sack, like a potato sack. And actually, you can see one behind me right there. That's a Sasquatch with a sack and bad children in it that I painted. But Sasquatch would take the misbehaving children deep into the forest, up the mountain to her invisible home. And that's why we can't find Sasquatch. And that's where Jonah, our Sasquatch, will boil the misbehaving children up and eat them. So that's what I learned when I was a young kid. That was our boogeyman. And it kept us on an even keel and a straight course and not misbehaving, especially when we were in the bush world, when we went out clam digging or harvesting berries. Where I grew up in northeastern Vancouver Island, we'd have to take a boat to get us out to the areas of harvest and fishing. And we would go on the beaches at night to dig clams, shellfish. You know, we after butter clams mainly, they're about that big. And we're also after cockles. It's a type of shellfish that's like a clam, but when you smash them together and open them up, there's a piece of meat inside that looks like a shrimp or a prawn tail. And that's what you steam and you eat and fry. And it's First Nations delicacy throughout all of the Pacific Northwest, but it's also the favorite food of Sasquatch, Jonah. It's also the favorite food of Bukwus. Bukwus is probably what got me involved with podcasts and everything, because I remember in 2015, roughly, my wife and I, we went to the Sasquatch Summit in Ocean Shores, Washington. And it was my first conference I ever went to on Sasquatch in US. I had been to the one in Canada and Vancouver in 1997. But anyway, I go to Ocean Shores and there's Dr. Jeff Meldrum. Well, of course, I got to stand in line and buy his new book. So I bought his book for, I think it was $22. Got a picture with Jeff. First time I'd ever met him, and Sasquatch celebrity. I was intrigued like everyone else. And then I went home and I was reading it. And lo and behold, at the beginning of the book, he says, the Kwakiutl Indians of northern Vancouver Island call their Sasquatch Bukwus. Wham! Threw the book out of the bed against the wall. I'm like, looked at Peggy. I'm like, what's wrong with people? Why don't they talk to us Indians? Come to us. And some of us are going to share the proper way to say Jonah, our Sasquatch. We're going to describe to them Bukwus is actually the little 4-foot high bipedal hair covered creature that is from the spiritual realm for our tribe in our stories. And it's the keeper of the ghost world. It's not a Sasquatch. I don't know what it is, but there's sightings of them. But this is a Sasquatch show. If you want Bukwus, I can talk about the little people, stick people, Bukwus on another one. But anyway, Peggy, she said a few things. Well, maybe you should start getting into conferences. Maybe you might want to go and get on a podcast. And I'm like, what's a podcast? She explained it to me. And I did some Googling and, of course, optimization, who should come up, but Sasquatch Chronicles, Wes Germer. So I sent him an email, explained a little bit about my background, living out in the bush and working out there as a hunting guide for 24 years, for specializing in grizzly bear hunting. I used to work with Safari Club International clients. I lived in the bush. I was a commercial fisherman. I traveled the coast. I'd had some encounters with Sasquatch. And then I have the First Nations Indian perspective on Sasquatch. So Wes all of a sudden phoned me one day and we started talking. And he goes, hey, can I hit the record button? I said, yeah, sure. And he goes, I'll put you on my podcast. So we talked for about 45 minutes to an hour. And then a few days later, Wes phoned me and he said, my listeners want to hear more of you, Tom. Would you do some more episodes? So I said, sure. And I think I did 5 with them. And the main one that really got a lot of recognition and still does is Sasquatch and Smallpox. It's where I shared the encounter stories from Native people talking about their ancestors during the dark days of the smallpox epidemics, where Sasquatches were coming to the edge of their Indian villages where their big houses were, also called long houses on the coast. And they would have their young in their arms, dragging their sick Sasquatch family covered in smallpox. And then people would call their chiefs, and the chiefs would look at the Sasquatches and tell their men, go get our sick children and others and bring them out and show them that we too are infected with smallpox and we don't know what to do. And when that happened, the Sasquatches apparently just looked down in fear and, just they couldn't do anything. And they turned and went back into the forest, into their world. And a lot of the tribes said that during the smallpox, Spanish flu, tuberculosis epidemics that swept the Americas, especially in Pacific Northwest Canada and the US and Alaska, Sasquatches too died off. And it intrigues me because I was born in 1965. There was about 800 of us Kwakwaka'wakw. In 1967, Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin would film Patty. Well, from the 80s onwards, it almost seems like we get a big increase, especially now, of Sasquatch encounters and sightings and reports. Well, if you look at the Native people of the Americas, since 1965, 58 years ago when I was born, we have proliferated like bunny rabbits. There's well over 5,000 or something in my tribe now, and it's indicative of every tribe and others throughout North America, Central and South America. Well, so too is Sasquatch. They survived those epidemics as we Native people did, and now they're starting to expand their population, and we're really seeing it on Vancouver Island. We have Sasquatch clans in inferior zones with no shellfish beaches or no salmon rivers. And, it just shows there's a population spike. And people ask me all the time, how many Sasquatches you figure are on Vancouver Island? 320 something miles long, probably about 50 miles wide, I guess at its widest. But if you look at a map and Google salmon rivers and streams on Vancouver Island, and every river correlates to the Native tribes that had a clan in there. So my tribe, Kwakwaka'wakw, I belong to the Mamliacha tribe, which is one of the 16 tribes that make up the Kwakwaka'wakw Lehota Nation. And in my Mamliacha tribe, we have 4 Mamliacha clans and 2 Kwekwasadunuk clans. These are family units. So we know where our traditional tribal harvest areas were for shellfish and seafoods, berries, hunting, hooligans, which is the smelt. We make oil out of it and smoke them to eat them. Very valuable even in this day. Well, we know where our clan tribal territories are. I did some analysis and research and realized that the tribal territories we have correlates to the Sasquatch sighting report. So in other words, we have an area where there's a cinnamon covered family clan, and they seem to stay in this one area. And north of them is another clan that's had a few sightings. And it seems that just like the Native Indians on the coast, where we lived for winter where the shellfish were, when the herring and smelt hooligans show up in March and April, we would move to that area and harvest and live. And then when seaweed big tides of May came, we might move out to a seaweed camp, halibut camp. And when the salmon showed up in the summertime, we would move to those salmon rivers or to the tagas, the fish traps and the saltwater choke points. And then when the winter fresh rains came in November, which is like monsoon season begins here in the Pacific Northwest, and the rivers blow out, meaning they get the flood conditions. They're deep, they're raging. The salmon spawn tapers down. It's over about. Well, that's when the Indians would move to the shellfish winter grounds. So too does Sasquatch. There's a few differences, mind you, like this time of the year, it's June. The snows are receding. The Sasquatches are following the snows receding up into the alpines above tree line because that's where the ungulates are, the mountain goats, the elk, the deer, and the marmots and ground squirrels. And they're feasting on all of the greenery. that's growing, the flowers, the plants, the grasses, the roots. And in turn, wolves, bears, cougars, Sasquatch go up into those alpines for the summer, beginning of the summer, which is right now. And as they go up in May and June, they'll see eagles and ravens and golden eagles and turkey vultures and crows. And they know that the snow is receded and exposed carrion, a dead animal that didn't make it off the mountain when the fall snows came and it died. Well, it's been in the refrigerator all winter and now it's being exposed. And a lot of people go carrion. Every indigenous tribe of Sasquatch Island, North America, had or still has a food that would be classified as from carrion, from rotten stuff. My tribe, it's hooligan oil. We catch the fish, the smelt, the hooligan, put them on the ground in end of March and April, and we allow them to soften up for about a week or so. And then we boil that fish in big vats, and the oil that comes to the surface, we skim off, we filter it, and it's yellow grease, which we call Claytona. Some people would say, "Oh, that sounds nasty." Well, no, to me, it's Indian ketchup. Great thing to eat. Liquid gold in the old days, even worth $600 a gallon nowadays. Well, that's indicative of Vegemite for the Australians, or Marmite for the Australians, and Vegemite for the British. And then when you think of the British and Europeans, they used to and still do shoot pheasants and ducks and quail and doves. And with guts and feathers on, they'll hang them by their necks in their basement or barn. And when they soften up over many days and the head dislodges from the bones because it's rotten, well, call it what it is, it's rotting. Then they pick it up, pluck it, clean it, and eat it. It's a delicacy. And then we have the Inuit up in the Arctic that have stink flipper that they bury in the ground, and ducks they'll put into the cavity of a seal after they clean it and then sew it back up and lay it in the ground for weeks and eat it. So Sasquatches, from my investigations, and I find are following that receding snow to get it to carrion that's exposed. And then when the grasses come up and all that, it's a time of bounty because all the ungulates up there, easy to get the fawns. The ungulates are up there because they can see, hear a great distance because there's no trees. It's alpine and all that food's there. And then the forest fires come. The Sasquatch is looking down from the mountains right now, and he's watching us dumb, hairless, bipedal creatures with our homes in the forest, some of them burning. In British Columbia and other places, entire towns are leveled from forest fires. But the Sasquatches, they're up there above tree line. In the alpine, very rarely will you get forest fire because it's really damp greenery up there, grasses and plants. So the fires stop at the timber edge. But also Sasquatch knows that if they see a fire and smell it and the smoke's hitting them, well, maybe they should go down at night, down the mountain, across the valley and up the other mountain. Probably take us 2 days. They can do it in half that period or shorter because of how big they are and how strong they are. And then they can watch that fire go by them. And then when the Sasquatch is up there in the Pacific Northwest and they see eagles and white seagulls flying in the rivers in mid-July, August onwards, they know that the forest fire season is receding down below. But they also know the salmon are in the rivers. And that's when they come down from the mountains and go into the salmon rivers until that November monsoon time comes, and then it's off to the shellfish beds. So that's what Sasquatch Island is. Ingenuity. I've been doing this for a lifetime. Seasonal migrations with great abundant proteins and foods to harvest, as all Indians have been doing for thousands of years, and so too is Sasquatch. And that's what I bring to the whole community of us in the Sasquatch investigator enthusiast world. You know, we should work together. We should cooperate. We should respect one another, number one. And that's why we need as moderators in the groups related to Sasquatch. Whenever you get one of those keyboard warriors in their mama's basement, belittling people and putting derogatory laughy emojis, you know, trying to belittle someone who's put a comment or a post up, we as moderators need to flush them from our group hit that block button, get rid of them. They're no good. They're poison in our community. And that's something else I advocate is, that. And the reason why I do that is because we hairless bipedal creatures are the dumbest critter on this planet. And you need leaders to text the nine tails or smack someone upside the head and get them with the program so we're all respecting one another. And that's one of the things I find we were lacking in our community. But a lot of people are taking my lead where they're getting more forward with how they run their groups. They're being more respectful of their members, meaning they're kicking out and flushing out those poison people. And that's what we need to do. But it also reflects on Sasquatch. So some people ask me, do you believe we should hunt down one and kill one? Absolutely not. That's one of my cups, by the way, one of my designs. Kwak native design of a Sasquatch carrying a fish. So Sasquatches, Indians firmly believe and advocate, do not kill them, do not hunt them, always respect them. So in other words, when you're walking through the bush and all of a sudden, boom, 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 tree knot, what do? Well, you stop, turn around, go back where you came from. That's what we teach our people, because that Sasquatch telling you, where you are, turn around, go back where you come from. I'm here, or me and my family are here. We don't want you here. So respectfully, you leave. And that's why I became an investigator, because I was watching those shows, BFRO. And by the way, BFRO stands for Bang Forest Research Organization. I'm just kidding. Don't get your panties in the knot, BFRO. But anyway, BFRO, when I watched the TV show, they're banging trees. I looked at Peggy. I'm like, why are they banging trees? But they're telling the Sasquatch to stop, turn around, go back where you came from. They got cameras and night vision. They're never going to see a Sasquatch by tree knocking. So as a word of advice, quit tree knocking. If you want them to answer you, sure, do it, But if you want to get close to a Sasquatch, take those baseball bats and toss them into your campfire, because they're never going to get you close to a Sasquatch. You start tree knocking. But respect. They shake a tree. They throw something at you. Tree snap, they pound their chest. They're telling you, I don't want you here. Please turn around and go. So, yeah, we're investigators. We need to get good photos of them and video, audio recordings as well. So, yeah, I'm an investigator. So, what I do? Well, bought FLIRs. You get those ones that FLIR has that attached to your cell phone. Those things are magic. You can see 200 yards animals. It just takes away the dark. We've recorded some video and some stills of more than likely Sasquatches. I'm not saying 100% because it's a FLIR image. Pretty good boomer image, though. But the other thing is cameras. Sure, our cell phones got cameras. We've seen how many Sasquatch videos, blur squatches, blobby squatches, and of course the keyboard warriors in mama's basement. They just jump all over you when you post one of those. I know, I've been there. So I don't post any blurry pictures no more. But if someone comes to me and wants to see them on my laptop, I'll share all the pictures I got and videos. Got some pretty good ones, actually. But anyway, buy a telephoto lens camera. You can get them pretty cheap. Like we got one camera from Amazon that's a video camera, 4K video and still, has a little bit of a zoom function in there, but costs $150. It's pretty good. And then my team, Sasquatch Island, we invested in two P1000 Nikons with a built-in telephoto lens that goes out about that long. And man, you can see craters on the moon. So in other words, if hopefully I'm going to have a encounter where they're not telling me to stop and turn around, meaning I've used my hunter bushman skills to turn the table on them and stop, get close to them without them knowing I'm there, then I'm going to take that zoom lens and zoom in. And hopefully we'll be able to see if they're eating something, the muscle movement on their faces and necks, their eye blinking. And, I've been pretty close to Sasquatches, and with that camera I have, I know darn well if they're sitting there eating and I'm downwind and I zoom in on their mouth, you're going to see the plaque and chipping on their teeth, and you're going to see their movement, muscles and everything, and maybe even their pupils dilate or whatever you call it when they get big and small. And to me, if once we do get that crispy, clear video and stills of Sasquatch, and then afterwards go in and do follow-up, look for tracks, look where it was sitting or standing, and take that height measurement with that tape measure and say, hey, that one was 7'4" to 7'5", and the shoulder girth was roughly so many inches or centimeters. And then when you have all that backup stuff and you present it and someone else does the same, then maybe we can say we have from pretty good proof of the existence of Sasquatch. And hopefully we're going to have a habituation going on like Diane Fossey and Jane Goodall did. You know, once we get a Sasquatch on the cover of National Geographic backed up with a major editorial with other pictures inside and on their internet National Geographic, it's confirmed. You know, no one ever doubted Diane Fossey that she was with the mountain gorillas and was habituating and interacting with them. No one doubts Jane Goodall was interacting and learned so much from the chimpanzees. So that's what we need to do in regards to Sasquatch, from my opinion, based on the native Indians of North America's opinion and beliefs. Didn't say anything about killing them because we do not and never will. It's all about respect. And when I lived in the bush for decades, there was times I was in there for weeks, months on end. You know, I just go in most of the time with just coffee and cigarettes, and off we'd go. We had fish hooks, we had guns, knives, tarp, blanket. You know, we didn't have a huge pack. We had maybe 20 pounds at the most on our back when we entered forest. And then we just lived like Sasquatches. We walked, we grabbed, we put it in our mouth, we bent down and rolled rocks. We ripped stumps apart for whatever was in there to eat. Might be you know, I've eaten mice, I've eaten ground squirrel. I will never eat a snake. I hate snakes. But, you know, everything else out there that isn't gross, you know, salmon, berries, deer, birds, you know, and that's another thing, birds. One of the things you really got to do as a Sasquatch investigator enthusiast is recognize the birds and how abundant or not abundant they are. We all know that birds go quiet. There's a Sasquatch around usually, or another animal that preys upon birds. But when you look at birds and you see how abundant they are, from little dick birds right up to big turkeys. I saw 3 turkeys in Medellin Falls, northeastern Washington, when we were driving there and last weekend. And man, I've never seen wild turkeys. You know, like I've seen them at a distance, but I never saw them that close before. They're big. There's a lot of food in there. And when I was driving from our Airbnb in the morning at 6:30 to Medellin to go set up for the Sunday's conference, I saw a mama turkey with a whole bunch of chicks that were the size of chickens. And the first thing I thought, seeing all those turkeys in northeastern Washington state, is no wonder why there's so many Sasquatch, because there's deer, there's elk, there's all these turkeys. So whatever we can do with a 22 long rifle, iron sight, single shot rifle, a Sasquatch can do with a rock. And keep that in mind, because when you start seeing tail feathers, legs, wings, and all of a sudden, like me, a couple of years ago, I saw 2 crow wings and tail feathers 20 feet apart on the edge of a logging road. Well, if a mink's going to take out a crow or a raccoon or a hawk, there'll be 1. Why was there 2 there? Why were there 2 deposits of seagull feathers and goose feathers in a bay? Actually, the geese were 3 different ones that had been harvested. And just the tail feathers and half the wings were left. And the beaks, bills. And I attribute that to Sasquatch harvest. So in other words, when a goose is sitting there, one leg up, and it's got its head under its wing and it's having a snooze at night, we know Sasquatches are nocturnal. They are most active at nighttime. Imagine how easy it would be for you with a 22 with a FLIR scope to go to the edge of the beach or a field and single shot 22, crack off a goose, a seagull. Well, that's what Sasquatches are doing with the rocks. So look at your birds and the evidence of Sasquatch harvest with feathers remaining. That's probably an area that you might want to concentrate on. And out here on the coast, not so much, because when it's low tide, the buffet table's set. So during the winter, and I basically 12 months of the year, because we have some homesteader Sasquatches that never leave a given area, and they don't even have salmon rivers. So they're not harvesting salmon during the summer and early fall. They're harvesting stuff that's found on the beach at low tide. And in Sasquatch Island, in my Facebook group, if you scroll through all the posts, or if you buy my magazine, it's out every 2 months. I just produced the first one here, but I'm sharing with you the seasonal proteins in the Pacific Northwest that I'll be interviewing some of my fellow investigators and some of my team members who are in other states and provinces in North America on their seasonal foods, like Lucas White in Omaha Indian Reserve right now. He's out on a week-long expedition with the gentleman from Toronto, Canada, and they're looking for Sitonga, they're Sasquatch. Well, right now, the mulberries, I didn't even know about them until I went down there 5 years ago, but these trees with these big berries that look like raspberries are just all over, branches hanging heavy with mulberries. And that's what their Sitonga Sasquatches are harvesting right now. As the summer progresses, you got all those soybean fields and other farm fields that in and around the Omaha Indian Reservation is, the breadbasket of United States area. There's a lot of human produced proteins. So a lot of people ask me, when I talk about that, well, you still go up in the Alpines, you still, go out for weeks on end. I'll go out for, a week or so, no problem. But as far as doing what I once did when I was younger, my right knee's starting to act up, my right shoulder's starting to act up, my right ear's dead from all my grizzly bear hunting, black bear hunting clients squeezing trigger with a barrel with a Magnaport muzzle brake by my right ear before I had my earplugs in. They blew my right ear out. So yeah, I'm falling apart, breaking down. So I found something a few years ago that intrigued me, was with the increase of Sasquatch populations, we're starting to see an influx of reports in and around our urban edges, all over Omaha, Nebraska, Northwest Territories, British Columbia, Washington State, and communicating with people in other regions. There's a lot of Sasquatches coming to our properties at night from the forest because we're edging it. Well, what it is Sasquatches aren't stupid. They might have a sloping forehead, but they have well-developed frontal lobes to rhyme and reason and put things together. I firmly believe that they think just like us. And in turn, when you talk to hunters in given regions, and they talk about how the deer populations are plummeted, they always blame the wolves, or the coyotes. But how many hunters are out there in camo shooting them with scopes, not even giving the animal a chance? Animal's 400 yards away, doesn't even know that human's there, and all of a sudden, bunk, it's on the ground bleeding and dying. We're exterminating them. We're over harvesting the ungulates, be it elk in some areas, caribou up in north, moose, mountain goats even. They removed all the mountain goats from the Olympic Peninsula because they're an invasive species that humans brought in. They're damaging the flora and the environment, so they removed them all. Well, there's a major food source for the Olympic Peninsula, Washington State Sasquatches that's been removed from their table. Well, they have to improvise and adapt like a Marine, go down the mountain, go to the urban edge, get into those human feed sheds where they have feed for their livestock and their poultry and their pets, and get into the gardens that they have where there's leftover fruit during the fall, winter, and early spring before the next crop is planted. When this time of the year is on and there's tomatoes outside, there's carrots, there's peas, snap peas, and the list goes on until September when we harvest. And then you got the greenhouses, 12 months of the year in some cases, where humans have food in the greenhouses. And I got so many reports about them opening up greenhouses and going in there and taking things and being seen, leaving evidence. And then you have the pet food we leave out. And don't forget the compost boxes. Can you imagine being a Sasquatch? And all of a sudden you go and end of November, there's no natural fruit or vegetable growing in the forest environment. A few roots, that's about it, and some grass. But can you imagine being a Sasquatch going in urban edge and hitting about 10 houses every night while we sleep, farting and snoring up in our bedrooms, REM sleeping. Not trying to offend you or anything. I just say what needs to be said, because when we are REM sleeping, we're out. And who gets up at 2 in the morning and goes and looks out their window and check on their garden, their fruit trees, their greenhouse, their livestock, feed sheds? No one. They're sleeping. We're humans of the day. Sasquatches are humans of the night, because I firmly believe they are humans. A lot of people challenge me on that or say, well, it's Gigantopithecus blackie. It's a relic humanoid, but we don't know exactly. Sure, I agree with you on that, because we don't have DNA conclusive hard evidence on them. But from what I've seen up close and from the reports we get and I've read, they look like humans. The only difference is they're bigger, they're hairier, they're nocturnal vision. That's what they've adapted. And they have armpit scent glands that they've retained, and they can expel that stench when they're afraid, threatened. Trust me, I've smelled that. It's been no smell in the bay, and all of a sudden you hear a Sasquatch, see a Sasquatch, and next thing you know, you're gagging because of that. It smells like a street person, human, that pushes a shopping cart by you in a city, and you can see the filth on them, and you try to hold your breath, but all of a sudden you smell it, and you smell that sour, rotten, stinky human smell. Multiply it 20-30%, you got a Sasquatch. And that's what they expel from their armpit glands. But I'm just speculating, but that seems to be what's happening. So anyway, humans of the night. Why do I call them that? Well, let's look at the early reports from the pioneers and newspapers that were first reporting about the mountain devils, the cannibal giants, the cannibals from the forest, Chunahua, who eats our children. And we hear about those big hairy cannibal tribe, things like that. So if a grizzly bear, black bear, wolf pack, cougar kill a human and eat it, do we call them a cannibal? No. We call them a human eater, because they're carnivores. And bears, of course, are herbivores, are omnivores. They eat both plant matter and meat, but the carnivores eat meat. So we just call them a human killer. Why is it that the Indians used to call Sasquatches, and still do, cannibal giants, hairy cannibals, and so forth, cannibals from the mountains? And we know of rogues. And rogues seem to be the ones that make you get published in David Paulides' Missing 411 series, because they're human killers. They're like beings, human beings. And nowadays we pretty lenient on the term cannibal. I still say that rogues are cannibals, because Sasquatches, I believe, are human. And when you look at the DNA, Ketchum and Dr. Driscoll, I've watched a bit. I don't read too much about it, because I know darn well that another capital D small r period before their name, alphabet soup after their name on their business card, some doctor, some ologist is going to come forward 10 or 20 years down the road and say everything that Ketchum and Driscoll did and others is completely wrong, because I'm right, because here's my thesis and I'm going to challenge it, and you'll all see I'm right about my DNA sequencing that I had studied. DNA is constantly in flux and evolution, so I don't pay too much credibility to it until someone comes in with a bone or flesh or something, and then all of a sudden they say, okay, it's got these chromosomes which are human, and it's a relic humanoid, it's a hybrid humanoid, who knows? But I'm just saying that they're more human, because they don't seem to be instinctual from what I see. And from the reports we get about them teaching their young and things like that, that's not instinct, I guess. I don't know. I'm not a zoologist. But anyway, they seem like humans to me, and that's what I call them that. And then when you look at the Indians who say, respect them, don't ever think of hunting or killing them, to me, it's murder. And, when you hear people that talk about to kill a Bigfoot all over the internet there about 6 months ago during our winter by one of the Washington State investigators. And then you watch these shows where they're out running around with shotguns and camo, and you know, I don't condone that. And besides that, I think we as a people, a species, has grown that we know that we must know our history, so we're never destined to repeat its failures. I'm of Canadian First Nation Kwakwaka'wakw from the coast, my father, and half Cree from my mother from Saskatchewan. My parents weren't Canadian citizens until 1961. 1970 or late 60s, the Australian Aborigine wasn't classified as a human. They're actually listed in the flora and fauna of Australia. And we know of the African people that were rounded up and chained and brought in sailing ships to North America to be slaves. They weren't classified as humans, and they just received their rights about the same time as we North American Indians did in Canada and the US in late 50s, early 60s. And in all honesty, we're, as people of color, we're still fighting for our rights. So today is National Aboriginal Day, June 21st. I'm so proud to be an Indian. And yet I know in Canada, that over 58 Indian reservation tribes don't have water that's fit to drink out of their faucets. They have to bring in bottled water. That's a human right. Every other Canadian citizen has clean water. Why don't those 58 Indian tribes have it within the confines of their Indian reservations? And why do we have Indian reservations? Why are we pushed away? And then we have to look at Christianity. I'm a Christian, I'm an Anglican, don't get me wrong. But if we look at religion and what it did to the indigenous people of the Americas, 126 million people killed in the Americas after contact for hundreds of years. The Mi'kmaq and others were hunted. The Gatling gun was invented to ward off the Indians. And we know of the March of Tears, where thousands died when they were forced from their traditional homelands to other parts of the US. In Canada, we had the Louis Riel uprising, where thousands of Indians died. In coastal British Columbia, we had the anti-potlatch law from 1884-85 to 1961 that forbid our great ceremony known as potlatch. And our children throughout Canada and the US were taken away and sent to residential schools to eradicate our culture, heritage, and language and our way of life. So know your history so you're never destined to repeat its failures. What happens when we do conclusively have proof of the existence of Sasquatch? I firmly believe that the United States will have their third recognized indigenous tribe. Inuit from the north, North American Indians throughout the United States and Alaska, and then the third one will be your Sasquatch. And in Canada, we have 3 indigenous tribes: Inuit in the north, First Nations, which I'm part of, and the Métis, which you call Cherokee down here in the United States. And when Sasquatch is confirmed, I think Canada will have their 4th indigenous tribe. We cost both countries hundreds of billions of dollars. Do you think the government wants the conclusive proof of the existence of Sasquatch being found? No. And that's why we hear the conspiracy stories about missing Sasquatches, burned Sasquatches being taken off by SUVs in black, and the men in black in Canada, the men in blue. But we'll get into conspiracy theories and what I follow on that and believe in another episode if you want. But anyway, that's what I think Sasquatch is, just another human.